Grand strategy games are filled with immersive campaigns, building provinces, constructing buildings, and furthering the technological research of your faction. This is very much the same in Total War Warhammer 3, but there is a much more brutal side to the campaign of Total War, and that is the combat map. Across fantastical spells, devastating charges, and pitched duels between legendary lords, you will command your armies across the map, leading them to victory or defeat. In part 2 of my Beginner's Guide series, I want to help you dodge defeat and go over some of the basics of the battle map. We've already covered the details of the campaign map, but today we'll be covering formations, combat movement, unit types, unit formation, casting, and some other tips to help you on the battlefield. If you're coming to this guide first and are looking for help on the campaign map, you can find that video linked in the upper right corner. This will give you a detailed breakdown of all aspects of your campaign as it pertains to the broader world map. So I'll be starting up a custom battle, and I'll slowly step you through a fight, showing you how to deal with certain situations as well as breaking down some mechanics for you. And this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things is upfronting the knowledge within my videos to see if it's the right one for you. So you can find every single subject we'll be covering in the chapters denoted in the timeline and the description. Feel free to just simply jump ahead to the points that interest you the most, or just use it as a point of reference to come back to in the future. Before we get started, and as I've said before, try not to get discouraged here. Total War is a massively complex game across 2 fields of mechanics, campaign and battle, so just take it slow. I promise the mechanics will click sooner than you think. If you need any help selecting a campaign, I have an entire playlist dedicated to a spoiler-free breakdown of each one that you can also find linked in the upper right corner. Before we get started, if you have not yet picked up Warhammer 3, you can support the channel by using the link to my Nexus Store. Nexus provides Steam keys directly from the developer, and I get a cut of every sale, which helps keep the channel alive. Lastly, if you end up enjoying the content, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. I cannot tell you how much that helps out. Let's get started here on the Combat Essentials Guide in Total War Warhammer 3. Loading onto the battlefield, we have our nice Kislev army arrayed before us. Now, we're using Kislev for this example because, like Grand Cathay, it is another army that is very regimental and standard in its formation style. It doesn't have a bunch of crazy weird things like the demons do or ogres, but you can apply a lot of what you learned here today with Kislev to all those other factions. I just feel like this is the easiest way to break out or disseminate a lot of these other mechanics. So what we're going to go through right now are the basic formations and some just kind of initial things to know about your overall battle map. And then we're going to go into stuff like control groups, unit selections, types, battlefield options and hotkeys, unit cards, all these things before culminating everything in a mock battle, which I will more than likely lose because I'll be focused with teaching you things rather than actually winning the battle. But that's okay. That's all right. We're here to learn. So let's go over what we've got here today. So to start off, we've got our front line. That's this first line right here. And that consists of our Kossars, our armored Kossars. And these individuals are going to be taking the brunt of the damage from your enemy. They're just going to take that charge right in the face. And the interesting, or at least the nice thing about Kislev is that it is comprised almost entirely of what is called a hybrid unit. Hybrid units have the capability to be both melee and ranged. It just depends on what type of hybrid unit they are. So for armored Kossars, we see that they are pistol and axe infantry. If I press I to bring up the unit card, I can look over here on the right and see ammunition, range, and missile strength. That's your context tip to let it know, or let you know, that you are a ranged unit on top of being a melee unit. Now, one thing to make a distinction here, if you are playing a lot of Kislev and you do want to know, like, well, what one's actually going to be my tried and true frontline infantry? Well, that's probably going to be your armored Kossars, because your Kossars back here are also hybrid units, but they are different. They are definitely more of a range unit that has melee capabilities versus this unit being a infantry unit with ranged capabilities. So kind of think of it that way to help you break out what unit goes where on your battlefield. So we've got those as our front line, and we'll break out again stuff about other things like armor piercing and whatnot in just a bit here. And speaking of that, we have supporting our front line some Zargard with great weapons. Now, I've put them a little bit more on my flank because this allows me to flex into different portions of the battlefield that might help out. Like maybe there is a unit that was someone in the back line over here. This allows my Kossars to go back and attack them. Or maybe there was a particularly heavily armored unit that's in the front line. That allows my Kossars to sweep around and go attack and help there. So this is a nice way to kind of help that front line. Now you'll also notice that the front line itself is not just a straight line. It doesn't need to be a straight line. You can see that this is kind of like a nice little bow here. It allows me, again, that capability to flex units where I need to. And you'll also notice that in between these units are little gaps, right? And these gaps allow me to take up more presence on the battlefield. So if I look at my leftmost flank and my rightmost flank, it is much wider than had I just simply put everything in the tightest formation possible and just arrayed them across this line. This allows me to take up more presence on the battlefield. If I press tab, you can see that even though my Cathayan opponent has a ton more units than me, I still can take up about a matching amount of battlefield width here, right? And that's important. What this allows you to do is if you're fighting, say, against Skaven or Greenskins, armies that have lots of units, you can take more of the battlefield up so that if they decide to try to flank around you to get into your juicy backline, this allows you to kind of deflect that, right? You can pivot into those charges and kind of prevent you from getting wrapped up, as it were, by your opponent. So that covers our front line, but behind our front line is our midline. Now this midline is unique because we are Kislev. These are Kossars with spears. Normally I would have spears around this location, right? A little bit further out, and allows them to pivot and take in the face any charge from cavalry or, say, large creatures, whatever is trying to get into my flank, or it allows them to flex into points on the front line to help out with large creatures charging down the pipe. Now there are two types of units that I want to go over here right now, because my midline is comprised entirely of ranged units. But within those ranged units are, again, two types. You've got your Kossars here that have just simply bow and arrow, your typical kind of archery. Another example here would be crossbowmen. Then I've got my Streltsy, which are gunpowder units. There is a difference between your gunpowder and your archery units, which is kind of a duh, but it's mainly more how they shoot. Gunpowder units are using, well, gunpowder and handguns. So they will shoot in a more direct line, a very strict parabola, as it were. So if I wanted to shoot anything in front of this unit, let's say something that was right here, I would need to be slightly above or askew to any unit in front of me. So if we take a look at the terrain right now, if I kind of zoom all the way in, we can see that we're just slightly above our Kossars. We might not be, if I kind of come over from this angle, I can see we're just enough above them to be able to shoot over their heads. But if this unit were right here, it would not be able to shoot. It would be obstructed from vision, and maybe the backline be able to get a couple shots in. So if you are playing as any unit with gunpowder and go, why are my units firing? It's because of this. They're obstructed from view. They have to be on a slight incline above any front line. So even putting them further back here would guarantee I can shoot over my front line. Now, with archers, that is not the case. They could be right up against these guys, and as long as they're not in combat, they're going to shoot their bows and arrows or their crossbows. The kind of caveat here, or the trade-off, is you just do less damage per volley and you don't have as much armor piercing. Things that, again, we'll get into in just a little bit. Now, adjoining our range units is our back line. Now, you won't always have a back line. In fact, if you're playing Khorne, you only have a front line. But this back line here is our artillery. Now, artillery is split across two different types of artillery, just like we have for our ranged units. You have direct shot artillery, like cannons, and then you have, I'm going to jump into the unit browser here to show this off. We're going to jump into a select race, and I'm going to go to the Empire. Empire is not currently in the game. It will be once they do the combined map. But actually, to do this better, let's just go to Grand Cathay, and I'll show you the difference here. So we have the Grand Cannon. If I hover over this little weapon, missile strength thing, hover over the bar right there, it tells us that it does base missile damage and armor piercing. It tells me pretty much it shoots a cannonball. Pretty self-explanatory. But this rocket does splash damage. If I hover over it, it shows me base explosive damage, armor explosive damage. So the difference between these two, you would use a cannon to take down a large single entity, such as a terracotta sentinel, or an ice elemental bear, or a bloodthirster of Khorne. Anything that's large and in charge, It's what you're going to want to shoot that thing at. You would use your rocket batteries or anything like a mortar, which does more splash damage, to take apart densely packed infantry units like these armored Kossars here. So it's worth noting about those two. I don't think you'll encounter them as much in the current state of Total War Warhammer 3 until we get more factions added in. The difference would, or the only time you'd really do it would be with Grand Cathay and their usage of rocket batteries and grand cannons, but I still wanted to make that distinction for you. So one thing too to note about our range units are some buttons at the very bottom here, and they're going to be important for pretty much your entire time playing battles. So clicking on our Streltsy, we have got some buttons that I already have clicked. In fact, this is already clicked by default for you, and I'll go over it right now. These three buttons are very important. The first one is called Guard Mode. And Guard Mode is crucial to not even just your ranged infantry, but also your front line. The way that this works is it locks your unit in place when it goes to engage something. So if I scroll back here, and let's take a look at this too, we have this nice big arc that shoots out from our range unit. That is their firing arc. Anything within that, they will shoot. And unfortunately on this map, you can't see it as detailed as I'd like for it to be. But just to kind of, again, I'm pretty sure you can see enough of it, but that's your rough firing arc, right? So let's say something were to come from right here into our firing arc, and they land right there. Well, our unit's going to shoot at them. Duh. But if I right-click on them, then they are going to pursue shooting that unit or attacking that unit until it is dead. Same thing with our front line. If I turn on guard mode, they will not leave their location to kill that unit. Meaning, if I'm shooting at a unit, that is again, right here, and that unit starts to get to a point where it flees, or maybe the AI moves it out of my firing range, if guard mode is not activated, the unit will pursue the enemy to the point of trying to kill it. Guard mode keeps it in place. It's the same thing with your front line. It's the same thing with your artillery. It's the same thing with all of your cav elements. Make sure you have guard mode on if you're being defensive. This allows you to not pull apart your formation and make it so the enemy can just sneak in here because you just have a unit that's chasing something off the board. Not as important. Now the other thing is fire at will, which is self-explanatory. It enables a unit to fire at will. Anything that enters its fire range, it will shoot as it sees fit. So with fire at will, again, just to kind of exemplify real quick, if two units were to enter their firing arc, as one got to the point where it was no longer, I guess, shootable, let's say that this unit right here got into combat with these guys, then it's not going to shoot anymore because it is a gunpowder unit. So it'll switch target to this one over here. Now, if it was an archer unit, archers will shoot into the back line of an engaged enemy unit. So if these two, let's just use my units right here as an example. If these two were fighting, and if the archers had enough, if this unit had enough density, let's say it was like this, the archers will shoot into this back portion. So just something to kind of note about archers there as well. That kind of covers here all of our basics with the formation style and how you kind of break all this out. But we have some other things I want to go into in this section that I feel are important. So when you take a look at our artillery, you'll notice that we have spearmen right on top of them. And this is a really good practice. It's a bit different with Kislev, but if I were to look at Cathay, they have the standard style of artillery that most of the other races in the game do, in that they have a crew that would be on the ground. In an ideal formation, you would place your spearmen directly onto this crew. What this does is it enables it so that if anything were to attack the backline or be summoned into the backline, or Furies were to swing over your entire force and attack them directly, the spears will enable them to kill anything that is anything that is large quite easily. And it's just a nice way to keep them directly on this thing rather than having to, say you're maybe not looking at your back line, something gets over here and starts attacking this unit. Well, your spearmen, if they're right here, they won't attack the whatever unit's attacking the Grand Cannon unless that unit also charges the spearmen. Putting the spearmen directly over your crew will make it so that they will actually engage anyone that kind of breaks into that cookie jar in the back line. Now, some other little elements I want to go over too are what we've done with my cavalry. and I'm from Southern California, I am saying cavalry, not Calvary. It's just my stupid accent. So you can see that I've put them in the back here. And the reason is that it allows me to be defensive with my cav. I can flex them out onto any location I need to that maybe needs a little of assistance. Maybe it's getting a little overloaded with units. I can just charge through the back of it and help out. Or anything comes into my back line, it allows me to, charge into them as well. Also in the very, very back, I have some lovely War Bear Riders. I didn't want to do this video without them. They're just so damn cool. And it also helps with the unit type stuff. But the last thing I want to cover really quick is our Vanguard units. So you'll see across my entire army, you've got some little denotions up here. Well, these guys have this little guy with a little arrow sticking out of him. That tells me that he has Vanguard deployment. And if I look on the battlefield, you'll see my deployment zone, and the enemy's deployment zone, and then the edge of the battlefield right here. So Vanguard deployment allows you to place units anywhere on the battlefield that is not your enemy's deployment zone. The nice thing about this is, of course, it allows you to get a drop on something. You can sneak around, whatever it is. If you're brand new to the game and you're like, I don't really want to deal with that level of like micromanaging intensiveness, just kind of put them slightly askew to your front force like that. It's just a nice way to kind of shore up an entire flank, and you can use them to, if your army's fully engaging, well, you can sneak them around if you want. But if you're, like I said, if you're brand new, don't worry too much about Vanguard. It can also be used to maybe get a unit right up close and personal and distract them so that your units can move around, whatever it is. But basically you would use this in certain scenarios, not all the time. So just kind of take it as you feel comfortable with the game. And the other little thing I wanted to point out is with our War Bear Riders. You see this little eye right there? It denotes that the unit is hidden. This would be present for some units that have what is called stock, which just kind of immediately cloaks them, if you want to think of it that way. Or if you put them in trees. I have turned off my foliage, but I'll turn that back on here for you. And we'll go into this menu just a little bit. This is what they would see otherwise. And some units cannot hide in forests. It's worth noting. But we all know bears love hiding in forests. That's a fact of nature. But we've got that done. And again, we're going to go over all that in just a little bit here. But that kind of shores up your initial foray into formations. If you are brand new and this is still just way too over your head and it's scary, you can just press Control+A to highlight your entire army and then hover over this little thing to do either missiles in front or melee in front. And this would simply place your entire army in a formation. You can see it kind of loosely highlighted there. The problem is, if you're playing as Kislev, these are considered missile units, and it puts them in the rear. So I would try not to do that. Just simply place anything that looks like it's supposed to be in the front line in the front. You can also just highlight the whole thing and just drag across, and that does roughly the same thing here. But again, I would not do that because it can get really, really, really spicy. Just try to put all of your infantry units as much in the front as possible, and then your range units right behind them. Even if it's just 2 straight lines, you'll be just fine as you learn the game. Don't get too overwhelmed with it. Let's now go into some control group action. Transitioning our conversation into control groups, there is one thing I forgot to go over in formations we'll just touch on very quickly, and that is the skirmish mode button. Now, by default, this will be on for you, and we'll show you how to shut this off by as a default later in the battle options and hotkeys portion. But I'm going to go ahead and select all of my range units and turn this off. So what skirmish mode does is it forces your units to move away from another unit if they get within a certain range, enabling them to continue using their ranged capabilities, which you'd think is actually quite good. But what it actually does is the AI is not very good about it, and it locks away their movement in the sense that if you give an order to move in a specific direction, the skirmish mode AI might actually have it move in a different direction, which is actually going to put them in danger. So I would always turn skirmish mode off and manually move any unit that looks like it might be engaged by the enemy. So we did forget to talk about that, but it was easy because then we were able to talk about all the units being highlighted at once. So let's go into those control groups. And I've broken everything out very quickly into essentially what we covered in the last section. So number 1 is my front line. Number 2 is my mid and back line, comprised of all of my ranged infantry units. Number 3 is my artillery pieces. Number 4 is my cav elements. Number 5 is my skirmish cav or anything fast attack style that I want to kind of have as an outrider that would flank into things and whatnot. This could be Chaos Warhounds, whatever it is. And then leadership elements or big legendary lords, I have at 6 and 7. And all you need to do to create a control group is pretty easy. So let's take Katarine here, and I'm going to go ahead and press G. That puts her into a control group. I can also press directly control, let's just say control 9. I want her in the 9 control group. You just simply, just like you would for any style of RTS, control 1, control 2 would set that control group. But the game makes it easy and just simply says, okay, we'll take the next one numerically, and that will be the control group if you just simply press G. So if we take a look at the bottom, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I press G, G becomes in 6. I press G, he becomes in 7. And that's really control groups in a nutshell. There is 2 other little things we're going to go into, but my big tip to you on control groups would be try to limit them to 1 to 5. I mean, I've made 6 and 7 here just to kind of show you how I would do different control groups, because we've grouped this according to specific battlefield roles. But 1 through 5, that's easily clickable for your hand, right? 6 and 7 can, depending on your mittens here, can make it a little bit more difficult to get to on the fly. If you're using WASD to move around the battlefield and you want to press 6, it's a bit further of a reach. You kind of have to come off of WASD. I would try to, again, keep it 1 to 5. Moving back to our entire army, the other big benefit of control groups is this little padlock here. So you can see for control group 1, our front line, it is enabled. And for control group 4, our winged lancers, it is not enabled. So there's 2 things you're going to get out of this. First, you'll see that my winged lancers are on the left and right flanks of my entire formation. If I just simply right click right here, it brings them together because that padlock is not, well, locked. When it is locked, it locks their formation, even if you change their formation after it's locked. And I'll show you an example here. Let's move these guys back. Let's look at our front line. So we're going to go back to number 1 on our infantry, and we see that they're in this nice front formation with a little offset right there. If I just press right click, they will move together as one. And since this padlock was made when they were in this formation, I can go ahead and just toss them all over the place. Doesn't matter. Then press 1 again and right click. They will jump back to the formation that we originally locked them as. So this is a great way to, say, move the individual elements, and when, say, the enemy is starting to flee a little bit or start to regroup, if you've pressed lock, you can just right click and snap them right back into the formation you wanted. It's a really cool thing. And the nice thing too about doing this with your front line, this is something we'll show off in the mock battle portion of this because we unfortunately can't right now. When your enemy charges across the battlefield, if this formation is locked, you hold down Alt and then right click them, or double right click to make them charge. This will enable them to simply do a 1-to-1 matchup across the way. It's much easier than you going click, right click, just down your front line. It just makes it a much easier set and forget type thing where you press 1, hold down Alt, double right click, the whole front line will charge to its like kind of adjoining directly across unit. And it's just done. You're on to your next set of orders. So those are your control groups, but let's go into some different things with unit selections, how to set up these control groups, and how to actually create a nice looking formation. So now that we've talked about basic formations and control groups, it's really time to go into how to set that up with unit selections and how to make it a little bit easier on yourself. So let's take a look over here at these units we have in front of us. And one of the big things, or one of the things that the game doesn't really tell you, is about moving these unit cards around, right? You can kind of just get them to be whatever formation you want. And you'll notice if I just kind of, let's do these guys on the right side, on the, the horse archers on the flanks with my wing lancers in the center. If I just grab a bounding box around them, you'll see that these are wing lancer, horse archer. And the unit cards are set up with different formation, right? We right click, it still maintains winged lancer, horse archers, and horse archers. The way to kind of get around this is that you can select units through the unit cards in the same way that you can in, say, just your Windows OS, right? You hold down Control, left click, and click whatever select units you want. Or you can click 1, press Shift, then left click, another one, right? And that just kind of selects everything from the first click to the right click, or the second click. Now again, if I click this horse archer, shift, this horse archer, I'm selecting all these, and I can right click, and well, it still isn't what I want. It's still horse archer, winged lancer, winged lancer. I want it to reflect these unit cards. And this is a way that you can set up your infantry much quicker by just organizing the unit cards and then doing this. It will unselect everything. Select the leftmost unit first, horse archers. Hold down shift. Select the rightmost unit next, other horse archers. Right click, drag out, boom. Horse archer now, winged lancer, horse archer. So again, this makes it way easier for you. If I were to do this and just highlight them all, then right click, it does not do what I want. It does winged lancer, horse archer. Shift or click here, shift, left click here. That's going to do it. Remember, you're always going from left to right in this game. That is what enables you to maintain the way the unit cards are set up, to then just press right click and there you go, it's done. Or I'm sorry, drag right click and it's done. Winged lancer, horse archer, winged lancer, horse archer. You don't even need to drag right click. You can just right click. There you go. It's done. And that's crucial. And you've probably seen me do this a couple times in the video, but me just taking this unit and dragging and dropping it there. That seems pretty nice and easy, right? All you have to do is select a unit, hold down the Alt button, left Alt in this particular situation. You can drag and drop around. You can even get spicy. You keep Alt held down, now hold down Control, and you can pivot. That is a great way to just simply go, you know what? I want this entire formation to pivot on its axis. Hold down Alt, hold down Control, and I can now pivot like that. It is great. As you can see right now, I'm slightly askew from my opponent. I can just hold down Alt and Control and then kind of fix that askew. So now they're coming at me directly head on. And just like that, it fixes and changes it. Now there's some other things you can do with Control and Alt. You can see if I hold down right click, it will also change the width of my formation. This is a very thin line. I would almost never ever recommend you to do that. I would always recommend a nice big long line like that. The only time I would not recommend it is if you are talking about your infantry. I'm sorry, your ranged infantry, any of your archers, anything like that. In that case, what I would recommend you doing is keeping a unit that is nice and boxy, like this, about 4 deep. If you really want to get spicy, you can go to 5 deep. But what this enables you to do is allows your ranged infantry to pivot on its axis way easier. So if someone comes into its firing arc, maybe like this, they're going to need to pivot to face that. When it's a long line like this, they're going to have to drag this ass out and that one forward to wheel into position to then shoot within its firing arc, right? Well, when it's a nice tight box, they can make that pivot much easier. So when you have your ranged infantry, make sure they're in a nice, good, tight box so they can make that nice pivot nice and easily. Otherwise, drag all your units out as far as possible. If you don't, especially with your frontline infantry, if they're just like this, anyone that goes to match it like that, when the unit actually goes into combat like this, these units will flank around and attack. So your unit will be entirely enveloped and will be getting attacked on all sides. This is not ideal. So all of your range, you want to not be in that situation, right? You want that, or I'm sorry, all of your melee, you want to be in a what is called spaghetti line, equally matching up with your opponent. So it is a 1-to-1 combat. Same thing here with your cavalry. You want them to be in a long, nice line as long as possible. I always just hold right click and drag out. Now, outside of those things, if you click your unit, you hold right click, you can see that the pivot point is the upper left corner, right? Wherever you held right click. If I drag left to right, see it goes right in front. If I hold down right click here and go right to left, it goes in the opposite direction. You can conversely just press J to quickly swap the direction of something front and back. Now, you can also hold down Alt and then right click, and it just does that same thing where it creates a center pivot point versus the far left or far right pivot point. Then you can just kind of spin things around, decide how you want it to look, and boom, you're done. So these unit selection things are not really very transparent in the game, and it's easy to find all of them if you know where to look. Press escape, go to the little directional buttons, go to advanced, and everything I just told you is right here. Holding down Alt and right clicking on an enemy unit will force a melee attack in melee mode. Okay, I didn't talk about that yet. We're about to, actually. Let's see. Hold shift and right click to drag a movement. Oh, we haven't talked about that yet either. We gotta wait until we get to the combat to do it. Holding Alt, you can left click, drag your selection to tweak their location while maintaining their relative positioning. Holding Control will also allow you to rotate the selection. So that we did show you. So jumping back onto the map, yes, you can create essentially waypoints by holding down shift, holding down right click, and dragging an actual movement path. I was going to wait to the actual combat to show you that, but spoiler alert, hotkeys. And the other thing too is every unit has got this button right here, toggle melee mode. So you can press F and it forces the unit to just automatically do it, or you can hold down right click and the unit will, instead of firing with its gun, will go into melee mode. You're probably wondering to yourself, why would I want to do this with something like the Streltsy? Keep in mind, the Streltsy are hybrid units, so they actually are good in combat. But Kislev, for example, has sled units that are chariots that are natively ranged. But you can force them into combat by either pressing this button to toggle melee mode or holding down Alt to force them into melee mode. Two things that are pretty important when it comes to unit selections and something you don't really get to see much of on the battlefield as far as like a context clue from the tutorial or anything like that. So now that we've kind of gone over a lot of these unit selections, let me talk about the unit types, because there are quite a few on the battlefield. Next up, I want to go into a conversation about unit types, because there are a bunch of different units across the battlefield. So looking at these Zargard here, let's go ahead and select them and press I to bring up that unit card once again. So this says it is a great sword infantry, and in Total War Warhammer 3 we now have a tier system that tells us whether it is a 1, 2, or 3 tier unit. But right next to this is the big thing I want to go over. There are different types of entities. This says small entity. So let's go ahead and click our War Bears. We'll bring it right here. Now look at the difference in those two icons. I'll click our Zargard, this guy right here. He becomes a big guy right here. That is a large entity. This is basically the type of unit that you're dealing with. Large entities tend to have higher mass. Mass, as you see here, mass determines the weight of an entity for collisions and knockbacks. So basically, when two units charge each other, one of the things that is looked at is this mass value. This was not something that was transparent in previous Total War Warhammers, but now we know that, okay, this is 1700 mass versus the Zargard, which have 150. So these Warbear riders, when they charge into the front of these Zargard, they will send them flying. They'll send them all over the place. Mass is a very important thing, especially if you're playing the Ogre Kingdoms, which have ways to boost their mass. Conversely, let's take a look at these Horse Archers. Again, they are a large entity, but their mass is only 600. So comparing that again with the small entity here of 150, they will still send these guys backwards, but they won't send them bulldozing head over heels like a charge from the Bears would. Now, some other things I want to talk about on this unit card, and we're going to go into more information about all these individual stats in the unit card section, but you get two little icons here. Armor piercing, and then bonus versus infantry. It should think of it as bonus versus small entity, or bonus versus infantry, right? These are infantry soldiers. Then if I click on the spearmen, they get bonus versus large. So these unit types allow you to do damage to different styles of units. And an armor piercing is going to do raw damage, a lot of raw damage to a highly armored unit. Highly armored units would be pretty much anything over 50 in their armor value. So if I hover over that little bar right here next to weapon strength, I can see that it says base weapon damage 11, armor piercing weapon damage 25, and then bonus versus infantry. So If the Zargard here were to attack another infantry unit, 25 damage would automatically hit that unit, bypassing its armor. It would go to melee defense, and we'll talk about what melee defense does in a bit. And then 10 damage would also go into that too, because they're attacking a infantry unit. Then their base weapon damage would get deflected or maybe mitigated from the unit's armor. Basically think of it as armor piercing and bonus verses are ways to add raw damage into a unit's specific type. Again, looking at small entity or large entity. And just to kind of compare here, the Warbear Riders do have AP and anti-large, or bonus versus large, so they would do 77 damage directly into the face of another unit. But if that unit was a large unit, say like another unit of Warbear Riders, a large single entity, which we'll talk about in just a second here, they would get an additional 23 damage bonus versus that large. Now, when I said single entity, we're going to bring over this Patriarch. This Patriarch, as you notice, is on his own. It's just a single model. That is a single entity model, which is often abbreviated as SEM, single entity model, single entity monster, either one. Another example too would be this Terracotta Sentinel from Grand Cathay, a single entity model. It still counts as a large entity. You are either going to be small or large in this game. There's no in between. But it is not part of a unit. It is one whole, single entity. And as thus, in Total War Warhammer 3, there is a wounds mechanic. So anything that is a single entity will have reduced damage, reduced armor piercing damage, and then reduced speed as soon as its health drops below 25% health. And that will last as long as it's below 25% health. So these things are important to kind of understand how the actual unit types work, because this will give you an idea of what units maybe go where in your formation, or when you're going to want to have certain units attack other units. For example, again, if I have my front line being hit by armored units, I want something with armor piercing to come fight it. An example, too, Kossars are not armored. They've got 15 armor. So my armored Kossars are just fine to do the damage to them. That armor is not going to necessarily be negated by their just base attacks. Now, this is also extended to weapon or missile damage. So if I take a look at my Streltsy here, they also have that icon as it applies to their missile damage. Meaning, of course, if they were to shoot at these armored Kossars, they would do more raw damage to them. Hovering over one more time, you can see that as 7 armor piercing missile damage, and it will do 7 raw damage to them. Everything in the game does have armor piercing on it, even if it doesn't. I'm sorry, I was hovering over the wrong thing. Here we go. This does 17 armor piercing damage. I was going to say 7 seems pretty low, but everything in the game will do armor piercing damage regardless of whether or not it says it. So these Kossars with spears, they do not have that symbol on anything, but if I hover over this, it'll say armor piercing missile damage 3. If I hover over this, armor piercing damage 5. It's just a way of the game to kind of normalize the randomness of dealing with armor and the possibility to just outright mitigate damage. So I did want to talk about those different unit types, as you will be encountering them in Total War Warhammer. But let's now go into some battlefield options very quickly before talking about those unit cards, then abilities and spells, and jumping into a battle. The battlefield options are critically important, and I've tried to turn on as many of the defaults that I can think of. So let me press spacebar. That highlights everything, and you'll see this little box on the right here. It should start like this. You press that, and it pops it out. There are some things set by default. In fact, I think this is the default look of your forces. So when you click them, they have this annoying little green outline around them, which you can change. We're going to go into that in just a second here. So pressing spacebar again, let's cater this to the way that you probably should have it. Because right now it's got stuff like the unit status icon that shows you if they're charging, it shows you their relative vigor, all these things. It's not direly important. What I would do is turn off that, because you have the ability here to either turn it on, lock it so it's always on, or just turn it off. So when I turn it off, I take my finger off spacebar, it's gone. If I turn it on, I hold down spacebar and it's on. You see, it's bound to spacebar. You press the padlock and it's in an always show capability. So I turn off status icons. It's not helpful. Another one here is threat level. It's apparent to me that everything on the battlefield is threatening. So threat level, I turn off. It's never going to be helpful for me. The way threat level works is, though, if I select these armored Kossars, it tells me their relative strength to the other unit. So it should say like, oh, it's a low threat, medium threat, medium threat, medium threat, medium threat. So you can see how it's really not that informational, right? So I shut that off. Not terribly useful. Harmony is something that is unique to Cathay, and I would always keep that on. It helps you get an idea of where the overlapping is and which actual harmony effect is kicking in. If you shut that off, you don't get to see the icon, but I think it's important to know, especially if you are playing as Cathay. Your hit points, leadership, and ammo are depicted underneath your health bar. So your health bar is here, of course, your hit points. Then this is your ammunition. I'm sorry, that's your leadership, and then your ammunition. So leadership is, of course, important because you now know whether or not the unit is going to flee off the battlefield. You can see also your ammunition on the actual unit card itself down in the bottom here. And that's also important to know because once a unit runs out of ammo, unless it is in defense mode, it will go charge into combat. So for the Streltsy, that's not too big of a deal. But if you say like the Kossars here, I don't really want them to go into combat just yet. So try to keep a good eye on that, and I always turn it on. Now you've got some other things here like the Lord and Hero portraits. You can see that if I hold down spacebar, my hero portraits are on. I actually like my Lord portrait to always be on. This enables me to, if I take my finger off of spacebar, I now know exactly where Katarine is in the battle at any given point. She does have a very specific banner, but if I do this, you know, if I'm all the way over here, I can still see, oh, Katarine, right there, jumping right to you. So it enables you to get a better eye for things. Another thing that is on by default that I would turn off is your type icons. These are these little redundancies, in my opinion, that are above your banner. But it also can depend. Maybe you like the type icons and not the banners. I personally like the banners. So type icons removes those little icons. But like I said, maybe you don't like the banners and you like the icons instead. Maybe it's a cleaner look for you. You would just choose that instead. But I always have banners on and then always on. Now for battlefield overlays, you've got some important things too. So the first thing is this. You click on a unit, it's got this annoying outline. You press that and it just shuts it off. It's never ever on again. And it is so much easier on the eyes. And if you do like it though, you think it helps you out when you're trying to find things in the battlefield and you actually want it to always show, by all means do it. If you press escape and you go into the cog, you can change those colors right here, especially if you're colorblind. You've got some defaults here that you can jump into, or you can just set them custom as you want them. You click on this and you would just simply set the color as you see fit. Going back over here, I'm going to turn off my selection outlines. Firing arcs, I don't have that always showing, but if I press spacebar, I know where everyone's going to be shooting. So I like that to be there. Same thing with movement paths. So if I move something, I can see that movement path. If I hold spacebar, that's by default. I like that. And same thing with selection markers. Now, why selection markers is going to be crucial when I show this off in the battle is because it enables you to see where your enemy is and where you are. And in the kind of tumult of battle, it might not be so evident. So keeping that on when you press spacebar makes it so that when you cast a big wind spell or a breath attack, which we'll show you in a bit, it makes it easier to pinpoint. And lastly, character auras I like to keep on spacebar as well. It shows me where Katarine's leadership aura is. I'm trying to find it actually right there, where it starts and ends. So it helped me out quite a bit when trying to get an idea of who's within her leadership aura. Now the last big one I really want to talk about is hide foliage. So right now, if I look at my bears, I can see them, right? If I hold down spacebar again, very bottom I see unit visibility. I'm going to unclick hide foliage. I cannot see my bears. And there are some maps that have a lot of forest on them. So you'll be down like this trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and you can't figure it out. I think by default, this is set to only work when you press spacebar. I just shut it off. I know it kind of makes the trees look a little jankety, but it's much easier for me to get an idea of what's going on in trees than have it be aesthetically pleasing to press spacebar to see that. So I always turn off that battlefield option. Now outside of that, there is one big one I want to go over. Press escape. Go to that cog one more time. This is all of your defaults. So things for me by default will run and they'll be in guard mode. The game default has skirmish mode on, meaning that all of your pure range units will be in skirmish mode. And the same thing with your hybrid units. This would be pretty much anything in the roster for Kislev. Turn these off. Like I said, skirmish mode really hinders you. Just go ahead and turn it on manually if you want to. But projectile trails, default drag out formation, slow motion ability targeting. So whenever you use a spell or an abound ability, the game slows down to 75%, slows down by 75% to enable you to do that. So these things are very nice. And also keep on highlight idle units. It puts a little ZZZ showing you that they're sleeping and not doing anything. So these are very crucial, but if you want to shut off or turn on any defaults, this is where you would do that. Next up, let's move into the unit card. Now this is really the bread and butter of your unit that gives you the most information and context clues as to what they would do on the battlefield. So let's bring up our dialogue here, select our armored Kossars and press I to bring up their unit card on the left there. And from here you get what the kind of denotion by the game is: pistol and axe infantry. These guys say missile and spear. This is bear cav. So you get what the game kind of considers them. You've got a button here that will then show you a nice little lore blurb on them, and then some kind of spark notes on who they are: armored and shielded, special ranged weapon here. So they're going to do a little bit of range damage. Let's go through some other stuff. Now you'll see a hit points pool. This hit points pool, take the total number of the unit, so 68 in this example, and you would take that hit points and divide it by that number. So it would be 5576 divided by 68 equals the individual hit points per model. If you wanted to know it, that's how you know it, but it's not really that important. Just look at that entire bar. That's all you need to know. Next to that, you'll see the unit tier system. Again, just something that gives you an idea of how important that unit is, or what tier it is in the recruitment slot on the respective campaign, whatever it is. I'm sorry, there's only 3 tiers, so you're not going to see like a tier 4 or 5, but it just kind of gives you an idea of how, like take a look at these war bears. That's a tier 3. I know that's a big boy, so it just kind of gives you a relative strength gauge. Your next up here is your unit size. We've gone over the unit types here in the entities, but you'll see 68, then parenthetical notation 68. So think of that as 68 out of 68. So if 15 or 10 units were to die from this, that would say 58 parenthetical 68. So 58 out of 68. It's just showing you the max amount in that unit. Your total kills from the unit with damage dealt, and then damage dealt as gold value. That's something that's important for multiplayer, so don't worry too much about it. Then the experience rank of this unit. They'll gain more experience as their battles go on, and any damage they do or any units they wipe out, they'll get bonus experience. Units will then rank up, giving them some melee attack, some melee defense, some leadership buffs for each chevron. They can get to a max rank of 9. We don't have anything ranked up right now, but you would just simply hover over the actual chevron on the unit card, which I've shown off in the campaign video, to get an idea of what that actual rank attributes to. Now for the stats, we get the real thing about these units. So for one, we have armor, and this is how resistant a unit is to missile fire and melee attacks. There's a huge big computation that goes into this, but just pretty much think of it this way. Anything with 50 or more armor is considered armored and is a little bit tankier. Anything with like 15 armor, like these Kossar spears back there, not very armored. It's going to take a lot of damage quickly. So anything shooting at them from range is going to kill them fast. Anything that gets into melee attack with them that will hit them will do a lot of damage to them with each hit. So those things are important to take note of when it comes to armor. But another big thing is this little shield. So these units are holding shields, so they are shielded. You have 2 different types: bronze or silver shields. The silver one is going to say this unit has a shield and will block 55% of all small arms missile fire hitting it from the front. That is a big distinction because, of course, flank or rear, they're not going to use the shields in that direction. The other one, the bronze, is a 35% block here. So if I click over to these guys, the Jade Warriors, you can see that that is a bronze shield. And it's worth noting that that is an outright mitigation of damage. 55% of damage will just be blocked. It's not going to actually hit the armor or anything like that. It's just not going to do damage to the unit. So it allows them to stay very tanky against range attacks. Next up is leadership. Of course, this is your, leadership. If it drops down to 0, they will flee off the battlefield and have a chance to recover their leadership and come back. They'll rally. Now, at any point, if you're wondering why a unit's leadership is dropping or why they're wavering, hovering over this bar will show you exactly any kind of penalties or any kind of boons or bonuses or whatnot are active on the leadership bar. So if they're, say, being surrounded by a bunch of enemies, cut off from your army, there'll be a bunch of stacking leadership debuffs. Or if they're attacked from the rear or a big charge, all these things would apply to your leadership. Next up is your speed, the relative speed of your unit on the battlefield. 30 is probably a good indication of general heavy infantry movement. The Jade Warriors, I think, move at 28. So 26 to 30 is around that kind of range. I think the Nurgle units move at like 26, 23. I'm sorry, they move like 23, 24, so much slower. Next up is your melee attack. Now, melee attack and melee defense are super important. The melee attack is your likelihood for your unit to hit the enemy unit. Melee defense is your likelihood to be hit by an enemy unit. You'll see here at the Armored Cossars, they have a higher melee defense than melee attack, meaning they are less likely to get hit and less likely to hit because they're really more of a tanky unit. They're not here to do a ton of burst damage in hand-to-hand combat. Looking over here at these guys, they have a higher melee attack and a lower melee defense because they are meant to do more damage in melee. It's kind of their shtick. So if you've played tabletop Warhammer, think of it as weapon strength versus weapon strength when it comes to attacking your enemy. Because melee attack then translates down into weapon strength. So this is basically the amount of damage you will do if their melee defense fails and you actually hit them. Your weapon strength is where the damage is going to come from. So you've got your base weapon damage and armor piercing weapon damage. We kind of went over this, but just to kind of keep it consistent, your base weapon damage will get checked against their armor. Their armor piercing damage will always happen. So if this unit bypasses your enemy's melee defense, it will always do 9 damage plus whatever damage is not mitigated by armor, because that's important. Melee defense goes to armor, melee attack goes to weapon strength. I know that all sounds very confusing, but like I said, just think of the role of the unit. If it's meant to do a lot of damage in close combat, it'll have a high melee attack. If it's meant to be very tanky, it'll have a high melee defense. It's kind of a general rule of thumb when it comes to your army. Individuals like Katarine here, who is a caster, she still has a high melee attack and low melee defense, but just kind of think of that as, oh, okay, well, this character, I know they're going to be hit more often. So I should be mindful of that when you take a look at their unit stats. Moving down into charge bonus, which will be different from every single unit, every single character, every single faction. It's particularly important for Ogre Kingdoms. This increases a unit's melee attack and damage when charging. So basically, when they charge into a unit, they'll get a little bonus to both of their weapon strength and their melee attack. It's not a 1-to-1. It's not like they get a 12 melee attack bonus and weapon strength. It's just, think of it as like a not a variance, but a measurement of magnitude. So if that says like 50, they're going to get a big charge bonus, right? So look at these bears. There says 38, so they'll do a lot of damage on the charge. These armored Cossars, it's 12. They'll get a little boost to Monte, but nothing crazy. Next up, we have ammunition, range, and missile strength. And in fact, we're going to look at a pure range unit to talk about that. So we have got here the ammunition. You can think of this as total amount of volleys. So got about 20 volleys that they'll shoot, and then they will switch to kind of jumping in close combat. It's not necessarily exactly 20 volleys. It's just, again, a measurement of magnitude. Usually you'll see something like these Cossars. It's 6. So as it gets lower, it is like more accurate. It's kind of a weird thing because I've noticed that these guys have 20, they'll shoot a little bit more than 20 actual total volleys. So it's different. Every single model has 20 shots in it. Think of it that way. That might be an easier way to visualize it versus I've seen the model, the whole unit shoot 20 times. Why is it still shooting? It's just kind of a weird way to indicate that individuals have their own ammunition. Then range, their total range on the battlefield here, right? So we can see that's the range of our Cossars with spears versus our armored Cossars have a much shorter range because they have just a little pistol they're shooting. Then missile strength will work just the same as weapon strength, showing us base missile damage, armor piercing missile damage, but look at this, reload time. And then below that, damage value shown is damage over 10 seconds. So that missile strength is basically an aggregate DPS. That's 19 damage per second because it's showing you that it's a reload time of 9.9 seconds. They'll basically get 19 total damage off because of that reload time across 10 seconds. Looking at a different unit, reload time here is 11.7 seconds. So what 17 plus 5 is 22, right? But because of the reload time, it lowers that DPS because it's measured across 10 seconds. So just in case you're looking at this going, why aren't those numbers adding up? Because again, remember, it is measured across the 10-second damage value indicator or whatever. So below those unit cards, though, we have abilities. And abilities tell us every kind of innate passive ability or active ability that a unit has. So example here for the Streltsy, they get the ability to hide in forests, which again, like I said, not all units can. And then their special faction ability, By Our Blood, which they'll be unbreakable if they drop in leadership. Every unit will have different passive abilities here. If I click on these War Bears, they also cause fear. Fear will enable it to reduce the leadership of another enemy when nearby. Fear cancels each other out. So I cannot make another unit that causes fear afraid because we both cause fear. And then upgrade to this would be terror. If something causes terror, it's even more of a reduction to someone's leadership. But looking at Katarine here, she has a ton of abilities, right? She has activatables, spells, and passives. Since we're going to talk about spells and abilities next, we'll just look at her passive abilities here, but we have a bunch of different things here. So it's not necessarily always stuff that's like causing fear and courage, which is going to increase leadership, hiding in forests, and faction mechanics. We also have stuff like wounds, which was one of those passives that reduces for single entity models. And this, Lore of Ice, which would apply to your actual spells. So you have to take a look at these things because it also shows you resistances. She innately has a 15% damage resistance, meaning she outright mitigates 15% of damage shot. Let's just assume she took a 100 hit point damage to the face and it made through everything and she's taking 100 damage. Well, 15% of that is going to go away and she's actually going to take 85 points of damage. That's how resistances work. Physical, missile, spell, and ward. Those are the different kinds of resistances that she'll deal with. Missile applies to missile. Spell applies strictly to spells, not to magic damage, which I'll show you in just a second here. And then physical is any up close and personal attack from a physical target. Now, outside of all of this, we've talked about AP, we talked about anti-infantry, all these things. I know you're probably just like glazing over at this point. We also have this. This melee attack is going to be a magical attack. So it will do a lot of damage to things that maybe have a high amount of physical resistance. This will allow them to do magic attacks and kind of bypass that. Another thing too is this. Ammunition is flaming attacks. So units hit by flaming attacks heal at half the usual rate whilst on fire and sustain additional damage if vulnerable to fire. So these little tiny things tell you that, okay, this is going to shoot flaming attacks. This guy's going to attack with magic attacks. I don't think we're having any with frostbite on him right now. But you'd always kind of look at the weapon strength thing to get an idea of what kind of attack is coming out. I don't think I have anything else that does anything else. But like if you're playing a Slanesh, they get soporific attacks, stuff like that. So always look for those little icons. Anything you're confused about, you hover over it. It gives you a pretty good little breakdown of it. So let's jump into some quick activatable abilities, then spells, and go into that mock battle. Before abilities, some units have activatable abilities, which will be on their left side here, where their actual porthole is. It shows their character picture. Or you can just kind of see it in the abilities section here by truncating stats. It shows all their abilities. So we can see here that for Katarine, she has 3, Stand Your Ground, Frostfang, and then Ice Shard. And then you look at the icons and it gives you an idea of what happens. So with that little triangle on Stand Your Ground, it's telling me that it is an augment in an area. That little kind of blast tells me that it's an explosion. See? You hover over it, it tells you exactly what it is. This tells me it's a magic missile. So a singular magic missile hurled directly at the foe. And also, you'll see stuff like this. It means it targets the self. So when I click this ability, it'll automatically target her, and it'll augment in an area around her, whatever it does. So you can see here it says melee defense plus 24, leadership plus 16, effect range 35 meter radius, duration 18 seconds, cooldown 90 seconds. It gives you all the information right there on the tooltip. And you can activate any ability quickly by pressing Shift and then the corresponding number, starting with 12 o'clock all the way around. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it goes to 6. What is this? Yeah, it goes to 6. It goes to 6. To 6. So pretty much, look at that. It even tells you exactly where it is. And then sometimes it'll tell you the amount of uses it has, the charges it has. So this Frostfang will do damage, 29 damage. 48% of that damage is going to be armor piercing. Remember, it's going to bypass armor. And then it'll also be magic damage. You see those little symbols all right there tell you every little bit of information you need to know. And the explosion itself will be a 15-meter radius. It's got a range of 200 meters, and it only affects units, you can see right there, affected units grounded. So they have to be on the ground. It's not going to target flying units. Lastly here for our ice shards. Aha, there it is. I knew frostbite was somewhere. I can see this is a range damage. It also has explosive damage with 100 of that. 100% of the 30 is explosive is what it's saying. If it said 50%, only 15 explosive damage would come out. I don't really understand why it's there. But it says contact frostbite, meaning that when I cast this spell and it hits something, or this ability, it'll do frostbite to them. And frostbite at the very bottom of this dialog box, right next to my cursor, it says frostbite lasts for 10 seconds and reduces speed by 30 seconds. I know it's a lot, but that's crucial to know. So those are your abilities. Like I said, everyone's got some that are single entity models for the most part. And just hovering over it tells you what's up. This is a regeneration in an area. It's going to target myself, and that's the area in which it'll kick off around. This is an augment in an area and tells me battle melee attack, leadership, charge bonuses, all these things, all hidden and not hidden too far away in those tooltips. Well, now let's talk very quickly about spells, because most of it we're going to be doing in that mock battle itself. We talked about the left side. Let's go to the right side for spells. And it's the same exact thing as we saw with the abilities. You hover over it and it's going to tell us exactly what's going down. But this is Alt +1, Alt +2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So Alt rather than Shift. Now here's a big thing. You'll see that number in the upper right corner. It says Crystal Sanctuary. Then at the far right it says 14 with a little circle around, a little blue circle. That tells us exactly how much Winds of Magic it costs to cast that spell. Now the hourglass in this little center portion tells us our Winds of Magic. So right now we've got 12 out of 100 Winds of Magic with a power reserve of 68. Now it says recharge is blocked. If I press start battle, we'll start recharging. And what happens is, from our power reserve, we will start to draw and put into our power. So you see this tank up here at the top, it's pretty big. Think of this as like the sands of time. Every time, it'll probably say every 6 seconds or 16 seconds is our initial recharge. A little pebble will drop down into here, giving us a Winds of Magic. So every 6 seconds, our power reserve will drain into our power pool, our mana pool, if you think of it that way. And that allows us to cast spells. So our current Winds of Magic are 12. We cannot cast this spell because it is 14. If I look at this, well, it costs 7 Winds of Magic, and we can cast this spell. In fact, the game tells us. So take a look there at that 12. I'm going to hover over it. Oh, now it says 5. So great, I get all the information I need just from hovering over the individual spell to know that I can cast it and how much Winds of Magic it's going to cost me. Now, an important thing to note too is this little green arrow. That tells us that we are able to recharge. Right now, again, it's blocked because we're in the pre-battle stage, but once you drain all of your Winds of Magic, that arrow will disappear. So your power reserve, I mean. So your power reserve, as it starts to deplete, will recharge at a slower rate. And it's worth noting that some characters have a way to increase that. So Arcane Conduit helps with your power recharge rate. So you're getting more from your Winds of Magic pool at a faster rate. I know that's kind of convoluted, and as you play, it'll kind of click, and you'll see even in the combat here, but those things are pretty important. Now, there are some other things with Winds of Magic, and we're going to get into them when we actually jump into a fight, but you've got this. It says it's a breath attack. This is a direct damage in an area, and these two are your standard kind of augments, or this one is a hex in an area. Lastly, we have a direct damage spell. So there is another one called Wind. So we're going to put a wind spell into here. I'm going to show that all off because we're going to jump into a mock battle, and I'm going to show you how these spells can be used, because you can overcast them, and that will have a little bit more information once we get into the actual fight and show this off. So let's jump now finally into a mock battle and put all these things together. It is finally time. Let's do this. Let's have a battle. Let's press that start battle button and let's have this get going. So my enemy is going to just start going down the pipe at me, and we'll talk about a couple little things quickly. So I've taken up this place on the hill deliberately. I know, Katarine. I know, you want to kill them too. Because there's a river here they're going to have to ford. Now the river is going to reduce their speed and melee attack by 20% unless they have aquatic. And I don't think anything in Total War Warhammer 3 has aquatic. So it's important to note that I'm going to take advantage of it as best I can. They already have some cannons kind of shooting off at me. It's going to do quite a bit of damage, but... oh! Right in my leadership elements too, what jerks. So, I'm going to take my little skirmish elements and just kind of prod them over here. I've got these big, huge, wide firing arcs, and these horse archers can shoot in a 360-degree radius around them and while moving. So I'm pulling this unit back and still shooting. And I'm continuously clicking here to make sure that my units don't stop moving in directly the path I want them to move. I'm going to press pause to show something. So when you have these kind of skirmish situations going on, and you've got a single unit attacking, well, you want to create an enfilade. So you'll take this unit, you'll go over here. You'll take this unit, you'll go over here. The AI now has to choose one or the other, and that's the direction they're going to go. The unit that doesn't get chased, well, you just have them, oh, okay, this guy's not going to get chased, well, keep attacking. This allows you to just mitigate a ton of damage that you would otherwise be spent just chasing and running away from this unit. Now, I did say I'd show this off, and it is important to kind of look at this. Oh, is I about to get charged, and I want to show it off. So I want this unit to kind of keep things spicy. I'm going to press pause here to show this. I'm going to press shift, hold down right click. See my thing kind of turns into, my cursor turns into like a little waypoint guy? I'm going to do that. Now my unit is going to follow that specific path. And you can do this in another way. So if I click these guys, hold down shift, I can do that to actually like have them attack. Or hold down alt and shift. See how it switches from a little targeting reticle to a sword? Well, I can go like this. And they'll take a zigzag to get there to do melee damage with them. If I hold down spacebar, I can see that kind of... I heard a little thump thump when I unpause. See that it creates the path. I know they're on a charge route because that path turned red, while these guys are on a move route to kind of get around them. So that's how you can use the shift mechanic, and it is honestly like absolutely crucial to use. Like, it is one of the strongest capabilities in the game to keep a high maneuverability on your units. And so remember how I said I kept these guys in the back for, oh wow, this guy's actually getting rocked. I'm not paying enough attention. So this unit's got some pretty low health, and what I'm going to do here is press this to heal, even though to be honest, it's kind of a waste. I put this character in here to show off a specific type of spell, but I'm going to do it, and they'll go ahead and cast that once I unpause. Remember how I said I kept the winged lancers here back as a defensive measure? Well, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Pull this over to here, and they'll pretty much swap out spots, and they'll charge those Jade Lancers. I'm going to get kind of weird with this. We're going to get her to move in like a... So another kind of tricky thing you can do when you're getting focused down by some artillery pieces is hold down shift and do this. It kind of seems cheesy, but what's going to happen is this character is just going to keep moving in circles, and the artillery piece won't be able to hit them. But look what's happened here, right? The Cathay's army has moved all up. Sure, they got this Jade Sentinel coming my way, and that's actually fucking terrifying. I'm going to take this unit and go on a wide arc around and go shut down that Grand Cannon. So again, this is a great way. You just use shift, have it go do whatever it needs to do, and my army is just going to take, for the most part, whatever it needs to kind of just keep this fight going while that goes and shuts down that artillery piece. So we're starting to get some engagement here from across the river on those peasant archers into my guys. Remember, they're going to take that shot pretty well. Not too worrisome. I want to make sure everything else back here is going well. We're having the same thing over here with... now, I can finally show this off. We'll get closer. Well, unfortunately, the AI stopped a little bit short of where I wanted them to do, but if I look at these Kossars with spears, they have this ability, Charge Reflection. So when bracing, this unit deals additional damage when attacking charging enemies. So if I look at my unit card, I see this, Bracing. The way bracing works is, if I look at my unit from the top, the unit, if it is charged within basically their firing arc, if you kind of think of their firing arc a little bit shallower, I want that help thing, as like here, rather than all the way at the flanks of the unit, that is their front brace. Anything that charges them in this direct front will mitigate that charge bonus with Charge Reflection and Charge Defense versus Large. When bracing, this unit negates the charge bonus of any large attacker. That is huge. It's why spearmen or halberdiers or anyone who has these abilities is very, very potent in combat, because they can reflect the damage and mitigate that charge bonus, which makes any type of shock cav particularly poignant. But if they're attacked from the flank, the rear, or the front flank, like that kind of direct angle, that charge, that brace does not kick in. Charge defense won't work. So you're going to want to look at these unit cards because it gives you a lot of information. So I know right now my armored Kossars are braced. They are firing their weapons because they are in range now of everything right here. And they are taking fire from the opposing peasant longbowmen. So what I'm going to do is get it kind of spicy here. We're going to get right up on this line. I'm going to move my guys right up here. And this might not be the best idea. I'm just kind of showing some stuff off of the video. And also Streltsy are shooting at whatever they need to shoot. If I hold down spacebar, I can see that my front line's being shot by these peasant archers. Or these peasant archers are shooting into this unit. So you get a good indication of what's going where across the battlefield. I'm going to take a caster here. And remember what I said about this location? It lowers their melee attack, so their likelihood to hit me. I'm going to cast Ice Sheet. I'm going to cast it right here. So that will lock these units into moving much slower through this. See, 25% reduction to their speed and to their charge speed. So they're not really going to be able to get up close and personal as quickly with me. So we're going to unpause. Remember, it's going to cost Winds of Magic, and they're now being affected by this. So let's click on this unit card again. You can see right up here, any persistent effects that are being caused because of something on the battlefield will be present right here next to the unit card. So Ice Sheet is reducing their speed. Conversely, if I take a look at my guys right here, my armored Kossars, they're getting hit by Frost Shield. Now that is a lore attribute. Every single lore of Magic in the game has a passive lore ability that'll apply to it. So this is Frost Shield. Armor and missile block is going to go up by 15 and 12 respectively for 11 seconds anytime a spell is cast from the Lore of Ice. So if she casts her Lore of Ice spell, that kicks off. Example over here would be Frostmaiden, who's got the Lore of Tempest. So Freezing Winds, anytime she casts a spell, it reduces the enemy's speed by 25% across the entire map. These attributes work anywhere on the map. So that's important to know. Now, some other things too, and I know there's so much, I'm sorry. You can see that this is going to last for 17 seconds, and this will start to go ahead and go around on a 14-second basis. If I look at the unit card, I can see this little blip is no longer filled in because I cannot cast that spell. So I can tell from just by looking at the unit card, if I don't have her selected, well, I can't cast this spell for her. So we'll wait for it to come back. So that is important to know. And we're about to cast an overcast spell, and we'll get there in a second here. So let's let them get a little bit closer. We got Rain of Fire coming down. She should be moving. Keep moving, lady. Keep moving. Keep bucking them shots. Now here's another big thing. Uh-oh, what's going on over here? We're going to take our Kossars and Alt right-click to have them go charge into melee rather than shooting, because they have those spears to do damage to those Jade Lancers. But back over here in the front line, sure, we're shooting some shots, and that's really cool, and it's really cinematic. And I'm sorry for the frames of magic, the frames per second dropping. But when you're getting charged, don't just take the charge if you don't have charge defense. You want to mitigate the charge bonus of your opponent by counter-charging. So this unit's going to come up close and personal, hold down Alt, because again, this is a hybrid unit, get up close and personal. I mean, if they're going to charge me, I'm going to charge right back. And this allows me to do damage to them that I would otherwise just be taking because they charged me first. If you don't have the charge defense, just get up close and personal, do that damage. And at this range too, I would probably start selecting 2 and have my specific range units start picking off ones of theirs. So let's go have horse archers. Their peasant archers get shot over there. These guys shoot. Where's that terracotta sentinel? It's over there. Not as scary right now. Shoot right there. I have them shoot into these celestial dragon guard for now. Let that kind of do its thing. Have our artillery pick off these guys right here and just kind of conjoin fire onto them to do a lot of damage. And since we've kind of juked this guy out, we don't need to take our wide arc anymore. Let's just go straight line A to B, go directly for it. So just to kind of give you a bit of an idea of what's going on, we still have some stuff over here to help out. We have these winged lancers that can go now into this unit to help out there. And we still have these bear cav in the back that are really going to be vicious once we get a chance to use them. And we're actually going to use these winged lancers to go around and start doing the same thing that they try to do to me. And unpause. Oh, look at that cannonball shot right into this. And into my own unit, so be careful there, huh? So now I get to show off wind and breath attacks for your Winds of Magic. So take a look at all of our Winds of Magic. They have the double chevron on some that can be called, that can do what's called overcast. So if I look at Hailstorm right now, it is a bombardment, meaning I click it and it's going to do damage in this radius around. If I double click it, I'm now doing an upgraded version, an overcast. So it tells me in blue, extended effect duration, increased number of missiles, but still has a medium strike area. And you can see another new thing that pops up that says miscast chance, 50%. So there's a 50% chance that this unit, this model, this whatever, will cast this spell and it will do damage. It will do what's called a miscast. And if that miscast hits, it does damage to the caster, but the spell still goes off. And take a look at Hailstorm upgrade in the upper right corner. It costs 9 Winds of Magic. So overcasting, as it's called, will cost you more. So 9 is your base, overcast it. I'm sorry, 6 is your base, overcast it for 9. So bombardment, I could use that right there, and it would mainly do damage to the enemy unit. Or I use this spell, a wind spell. So you can see that this is a nice big ol' attack, and it's going to do an attack in this range, right? This big long stripe. Now if I hold left click, it allows me to turn and pivot this on an axis to say, I want to do it right down the pipe like this. Otherwise you have to angle the camera kind of funky, and it's just not worth it. Right click to cancel that, so you can just maybe stop doing it in this case. But how do I know how to do this properly? Well, hold down spacebar. Remember, it brings up those unit selections, those little I guess chevrons, those little arrows. Tells me what units are where on the battlefield. I can see, okay, my units are all right here. Let's go ahead and do this wind attack and right here. Now you see that big arrow, the big gray arrow? If I go too far, it turns red. It tells me I am out of range to cast this ability. And before I even select it, you'll see another big, look right here. You'll see this big circle pop up. That's telling me the max range in which I can cast this ability. So if you're wondering, oh man, well, I don't know, how far do I have to get? Oh, okay, now I see. You know, it's like that little circle tells you exactly how far you can cast this spell. There you go. Go right outside that max little circle, it does this. And if you look at the caster, this caster is right here. I'm going to pull all the way across. You see that like kind of dotted line? It's telling you that the caster is going to move to the point of the beginning of the red line to then cast the spell. So again, that's a lot of information, but just to kind of break that out. Let's go ahead and cast Biting Wind right here. I think things are going to flee by the time this goes off, but it's a really cool ability. And we'll do this. We'll hold down spacebar. Well, it's still going to kind of clip my guys. Let's go ahead and do right like here. It's still going to hit them, but they're not going to be too bad. Actually, we'll do right. Where is it? Here. This should be good enough. And I know that's going to hit it's going to hit that unit, and this wind spell is going to keep going. Going to keep going in this direction and probably hit this unit. So it's a very, very good wind attack. We'll let this go off. Oh, we got another unit jumping in on it. Oh, that's so good. I love it. There we go. Going right across the way, doing damage to everything, right? It did hit my units a little bit. That's all right. Now, there is another type of attack I want to show off here because it is important. And that here is your breath attack. Same thing like the wind attack where it's got a very set little damage cone. And you can see exactly where that's going to do it. But you would just pivot it again. Now, some breath attacks, wind attacks, I'm sorry, are a much more concave, and some are more convex. I mean, some are more obtuse. I think that's the word I meant to, and some are more acute. I think those are the two words I meant to use. And this will keep going for much further than this actual cone. So you see this unit right here? We're going to go ahead and let it go off. We'll cast the spell. You can see it's going to take 1 second to actually cast this spell. It goes off, does damage, and it usually will keep going. Like Stream of Corruption for Nurgle will keep going. And I actually did some damage to my own unit, which is unfortunate. I'm going to take these guys over here and help against the Celestial Dragon Guard, because if I look at them, they have very high armor, and these Zara Great Guard have that armor-piercing anti-infantry. Allows me to do a lot of damage there. So things, for the most part, are going quite well across our battlefield. We're doing good damage to our enemies' pretty prime units. We're getting into this flank over here. We're going to start doing damage onto these peasant archers, which is great. We are taking a little damage on our Frostmaiden, but that's okay. We're going to move her up. Get her out of range of things. I'll show off a Vortex spell in a little bit. In fact, no, this is a perfect time to do it. And we'll get this guy up here to show off a heal, too. But we have another ability called Heart of Winter. In fact, we don't have quite enough Winds of Magic. Remember I said we'd show you the recharge rate? So hovering over this now that the battle started, I see that recharge 1 power per 7 seconds. So from my reserve, my 39 reserve, 1 Winds of Magic is dropping into my power at 1 per second. The recharge modifier effects, Arcane Conduit is increasing it by 40%. So that gives you an idea of, okay, well, I've got 19 Winds of Magic. I need 24 Winds of Magic to cast Heart of Winter. That's 5 Winds of Magic. It's going to take me, what, a little bit over 35 seconds to probably get to that point, depending on where we are at in the current cycle. So we'll unpause that, and we'll use Hawks of Mishka. And this is a Vortex ability. We'll cast this down. 4, 3, 2, 1. Goes off. And it just keeps doing damage. See how this moves? That's the difference between a Vortex and a Bombardment. A Bombardment will just simply do damage in a set location. Oh my. I'm looking at my backline over there getting beat up. Let's take a look at this. I'll show you the difference here. Bombardment is just going to drop this spell right here. It's actually probably terrible. And if you look up there it comes. Smash, 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 smash. All in that range. But we're starting to lose some health on our front line. Let's take a look at our guy once more and have him cast Solyak's Lullaby. And that'll give some health right here. We should be in good shape. Little Grom is really good at doing direct damage here to big guys, so we're going to have him switch to the Terracotta Sentinels. We've shut down that artillery in the back line using our horse archers. Now we're just really kind of trying to shore things up here. Things are getting pretty spicy, so let's try and focus on the leadership element of our opponent. And we just so happen to have 2 very good characters to do so. Tsarina Katarine is a wizard, and I would not recommend you jumping her into combat, but in this case, she's on a bear. So I'm not too worried about it. And in fact, we'll get our shock elements out with our war bears, and jump in that Lord Magistrate. Now, something to consider is some units have abilities that are really good before you actually get into combat. Let's go ahead and pause this again one more time and look at our Patriarch. He has this ability, Ursun's Roar, charge bonus plus 36% to anything in radius for the spell. Unfortunately, no one else is, but we might as well get the bonus because it's not going to give us too much of an advantage when we're in combat. So we'll look at this. His bonuses right now is 50. Press that. It'll go off, and now it goes to 68. So you can see that's going to do a lot more damage to him. Remember how I said too about leadership? Take a look at these Zargard. See that number's in red? If I hover over it, I can see 75, but there's damage is sustained. The enemy's routing. We're winning the current combat, but we've got an exposed flank. But we're encouraged by the nearby units. So there's a lot of context clues you just simply get by pausing and looking at things. Don't be afraid to pause or slow the game down, to take a look at whatever you have to do. There is no shame in it, especially if you're brand new to the game. There is a lot of complexity. I do it, and I've been playing this game for like 8 years. So just take it in whatever pace you need to. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for slowing the game down to think otherwise. So here's another cool little pocket of things going down we're going to pause and look at. This is a nice little wraparound we have on this. We can go ahead and use Hailstorm. Actually, you know what? I'll show you an augment because we haven't used one of those. So this is an augment in an area, right? So we can cast this, and everything right here is going to get this. And pretty much what makes the difference between whether or not a unit is in range. So take a look at these armored Kossars. See the little flag? Once it gets kind of fully engulfed, there you go. Pretty much 55% of the unit has to be in the circle. Then it'll start to blink, showing us, hey, it's in range. So we get the bonus right there if I cast it. And that also applies to heals, but heals will only sometimes hit a certain number of units, say 5 units. Unfortunately, nothing in the Kiss of Army aside from Soyok's Lullaby will heal, but it will typically say something like only heals up to 5 units. Now we're jumping really hard onto their leadership elements. We're starting to capitulate everything else across the battlefield here, which is really good. But we still got that big guy to deal with. Let's get those warbears on him, because these guys can do armor piercing, and they've got that anti-large, that bonus versus large. It's taking shots in the face from a cannonball, no less. Not even worried about that. And keep these on this. So one thing to note about single entities, they will sometimes drop their attack orders because of the AI when it comes to allocating its attack. It'll say, oh, well, I'm surrounded by other things. I'll attack what's closest to me. You have to kind of spam click to make sure it really stays on keeping this guy out. And you'll see that across the board, these little things are starting to happen. These little skulls with a flag. That tells me that this unit is shattered. Army losses are happening, and army losses kick in after a certain percentage of the armies left on the battlefield versus a certain percentage of my army. So they're fleeing. They're not going to come back. Shattered means that they are routing forever. Otherwise, it will say broken. If it says broken, it has a chance to recover its leadership and it will come back to the battlefield. All these things will just kind of pop up on these unit cards above your units, just like this says right here. Hey, we're in melee. There we go. We can go ahead and deal with that. I know that's in melee right now. Or this right here, I know that's firing. We've taken a look at these before, but just to kind of show that this is moving fast or charging. The alternative to that would simply be just right-clicking once, pressing R, and it would go to a walk. We'll go pause, and see he's walking, press R, and he'll run. R, and he'll walk, press R, and he'll run. So that is going to be this battle here. We've done it, guys. We've won against Grand Cathay. We did not show Alt-clicking by pressing 1, locking the padlock, holding down Alt, and double right-clicking on a unit. This will cause all of our unit to charge in formation in front, but we were in a pretty advantageous position that we didn't want to really, lose out on. But we have gotten a victory, and hopefully now you have a better idea of how to do combat and battle in Total War Warhammer 3. I know we covered so much, and this is a very dense subject, and you're going to be spending a lot of your time on this battle map. So if you have any questions, if you're confused about anything, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. I am more than happy to talk you through whatever I can. But a lot of it really comes down to playing the game. Get used to it. Just jump in, pause it for as much as you need to. Go to slow-mo if you need to, so the game is moving at a much slower pace. Take your time, allocate your commands, and do what you need to do. If you keep pausing it nonstop, don't worry. You will get to a point where you will be fluid enough with combat that you can just have things kind of go together. And I maybe did that a little too much here on accident because I've just been playing for so long. But a lot of it comes down to muscle memory, recognizing what certain things are going to attack other certain things. It kind of comes out to like, hey, I know this unit is going to be good against that unit over there. That just comes with time. So don't get discouraged. If you're losing a lot of your fights, it's okay. It happened to me. It still happens to me. And you have plenty of chances to either do a rematch after the fight. It'll say something. I think if I press it right now. Yeah, I have rematch. It's the same thing will happen in single player. This is just against the AI. And don't, like I said, get discouraged. Just do a rematch if you need to, save scum if you need to, just do whatever it takes to get familiar with this process. I've gone ahead and done all this using the custom battle section of the game versus AI. So you can do the same thing here. Go ahead and set up a map, an army, try out some things, see what works for you, and just learn the game however you can. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. But have a good one and take care.